Welcome to our channel. Here we learn new ideas and improve our English at the same time through stories. You practice English without feeling like you're studying. So let us start. Adolf Hitler is one of the most studied and feared figures in modern history. His name became tied to war, dictatorship, and mass murder on a scale that still shocks people today. Most of us first hear about him through World War II and the Holocaust, but to understand how he caused so much destruction, it helps to look earlier. His rise was not sudden. It came from years of failure, resentment, ambition, and a growing talent for manipulating people who were angry and desperate. He was born on April 20, 1889, in Braunau am Inn, a town in Austria near the German border. His father, Adolf Hitler, was a customs official, strict and difficult by most accounts. His mother, Clara, was the opposite. She was gentle, deeply devoted to her son, and far more protective. That difference shaped Adolf from a young age. His father pushed discipline, while his mother gave him affection and sympathy almost without limit. As a boy, Hitler did not stand out as especially gifted in school. He could be moody, lazy, and stubborn, and he often clashed with authority. He liked daydreaming more than doing steady work. For a time, he talked about becoming an artist, and that dream became one of the few things he held on to with real confidence. He imagined a future for himself that was grand and important, even when there was not much evidence that he had the discipline or talent to reach it. Family life was also unstable in ways that mattered. Hitler's younger brother Edmund died young, and that loss affected the household deeply. Not long after, Adolf's father died too. With his father gone, there was less pressure on him to follow a practical path. His mother, who loved him intensely, did not force him into a career or a strict routine. So, instead of becoming more responsible, he drifted. He left school without building any clear future for himself. He dressed well when he could, carried himself with more confidence than his situation deserved, and spoke as if success was already waiting for him. He told people he would become a great artist. That was the story he liked best about himself. But real life was harder than his imagination. Hitler applied to the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna and was rejected. That rejection hit him hard. He had built up the idea that he was meant for something special, and suddenly the world gave him an answer he did not want to hear. He tried again and failed again. Around the same time, his mother became seriously ill with breast cancer. Her death in 1907 devastated him. By that point, both of his parents were gone, and the person who had believed in him most was no longer there. After her death, Hitler moved fully into a rougher stage of life in Vienna. The inheritance he had was limited, and he burned through money quickly. He did not build a career, did not settle into steady work, and soon found himself living in poverty. At times he stayed in shelters and cheap men's hostels, getting by however he could. He sold small paintings and postcards, mostly city scenes. But it was not the life of a successful artist. It was survival. Vienna mattered for another reason too. It was there, during those difficult years, that many of his political attitudes hardened. He lived in a city full of ethnic tension, nationalist ideas, and ugly forms of prejudice that were common in parts of Europe at the time. Hitler did not invent those hatreds, but he absorbed them. Over time, they became central to the way he explained the world to himself. So before he was a dictator, before he was even a politician, Hitler was a bitter and drifting young man who felt cheated by life, convinced He was meant for more and increasingly drawn to ideas that blamed others for his failures. That mindset would become dangerous once history handed him a larger stage. In 1913, Adolf Hitler left Austria and moved to Munich, Germany. At that point, he was still an unsuccessful artist, living on very little, but he was strongly drawn to German nationalism and wanted to be part of what he saw as a larger German world. Then, in 1914, World War I began. And like many young men of the time, Hitler saw the war as a moment of purpose. For the first time in his life, he found structure. He joined the German army and served as a messenger on the Western Front, a dangerous role that required carrying information between units under heavy fire. Whatever else can be said about him, Hitler appears to have been brave in combat. He was wounded, survived gas attacks, and received medals for service. The war gave him something he had lacked for years: a clear identity, a place to belong, and a cause larger than himself. That is one reason Germany's defeat hit him so hard. When the war ended in 1918, Germany was exhausted, humiliated, and politically shaken. The Kaiser was gone, the monarchy collapsed, and a new democratic government, later known as the Weimar Republic, took over. Then came the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. To many Germans, it felt like a national disgrace. Germany lost territory, accepted blame for the war, and was forced to pay huge reparations. Those pressures fed bitterness across the country. The new government struggled badly. Political violence broke out, trusting leaders fell, and the economy became a disaster. In the early 1920s, Germany suffered hyperinflation so extreme that money became nearly worthless. Prices changed by the hour. Savings vanished. Ordinary people watched their lives fall apart. That kind of chaos made many Germans desperate for someone to blame and someone to follow. Hitler was paying close attention. After the war, he remained connected to the army and was assigned to observe political groups in Munich. In 1919, he attended a meeting of a small organization called the German Workers' Party. He went there as an observer, but quickly found that the group's nationalist and anti-Semitic ideas matched views he had already developed. More importantly, the people there noticed something about him. He could speak. Hitler was not a calm or thoughtful speaker. He was emotional, angry, theatrical, and intense. But in that damaged post-war atmosphere, those qualities gave him power. He had a talent for reading a crowd, feeding its anger, and making complicated problems sound simple. Germany was suffering, he said, because it had been betrayed. Its enemies were Jews, Marxists, weak politicians, and anyone who stood in the way of national rebirth. It was a hateful message, but it was delivered with force, and many people responded to it. He soon joined the party and helped reshape it into the National Socialist German Workers' Party, better known as the Nazi Party. As the party grew, so did Hitler's role inside it. He was not important because of a military record or high education. He rose because he could attract followers, stir emotion, and make frustrated people feel that he understood their pain. He promised restored pride, restored order, and a stronger Germany. It was a dangerous mix of grievance, fantasy, and blame. Then, in 1923, believing the time was right, Hitler tried to seize power in Munich by force. The attempt, known as the Beer Hall Putsch, failed badly. Hitler and many supporters were arrested. At first glance, it looked like the end of his political career, but it turned into something else. During his trial, Hitler used the courtroom as a stage, presenting himself as a patriot rather than a criminal. He was convicted and sent to prison, but the sentence was light. While imprisoned, he began writing the book that would become Mein Kampf. It was part autobiography, part political program, and part warning of what he hoped to do. The book laid out his worldview clearly: extreme nationalism, racist ideology, hatred of Jews, contempt for democracy, and a belief that Germany needed expansion, obedience, and a single powerful leader. When he left prison, Hitler had learned an important lesson. If he wanted power, he would not grab it in one reckless uprising. Next time, he would take it through the system itself. After leaving prison in 1924, Adolf Hitler changed his approach. The failed beer hall putsch had shown him that trying to grab power by force was too risky. So, instead of launching another reckless revolt, he focused on building the Nazi Party into a national political machine. He wanted power legally, or at least to make it look legal. For a few years, that goal seemed out of reach. Germany actually began to stabilize in the mid-1920s. Foreign loans helped the economy recover somewhat, and life became less chaotic than it had been during the worst inflation years. When people are less desperate, extremists usually have a harder time gaining support, and that was true for Hitler as well. The Nazi Party still existed, but it was not yet the force it would later become. Then came 1929. The Great Depression hit Germany hard. American loans dried up, businesses collapsed, unemployment soared, and the democratic government looked helpless. Once again, millions of Germans felt humiliated, frightened, and angry. And once again, Hitler had a message ready for them. He promised jobs, strength, unity, and a return to national pride. He told people that Germany had been weakened by traitors, corrupted by enemies, and humiliated by weak leaders. He made hatred sound like patriotism. That was one of his most dangerous talents. He did not just speak to people's fears. He gave those fears a target. Jews, communists, liberals, and other supposed enemies were blamed again and again for problems that were far bigger and more complex than any one group. Hitler's speeches were full of exaggeration and false promises, but in desperate times, certainty can sound more attractive than honesty. The Nazi Party grew quickly in those years. Wealthy industrialists and conservative elites who feared communism began to see Hitler as useful. They did not necessarily admire him, but many thought they could control him. That was a terrible miscalculation. At the same time, millions of ordinary Germans voted for the Nazis because they were tired of instability and wanted change at almost any cost. By 1932, the Nazis were the largest party in the Reichstag, Germany's parliament. President Paul von Hindenburg did not especially trust Hitler, but political deadlock was getting worse, and powerful advisors pushed for a deal. They believed Hitler could be brought into government, given a title, and boxed in by older, more traditional politicians. So on January 30, 1933, Hindenburg appointed Adolf Hitler as Chancellor of Germany. That appointment changed history. Within weeks, a major event gave Hitler the chance to destroy what remained of German democracy. On February 27, 1933, the Reichstag building caught fire. A Dutch communist was arrested, and Hitler immediately used the fire as proof that Germany was under threat from communists. Whether the Nazis directly caused the fire or simply took advantage of it, the result was the same. Hitler pushed through emergency measures that suspended key freedoms, including freedom of the press, privacy rights, and protections against arrest without cause. In other words, fear became the excuse for dictatorship. Soon after, the Enabling Act gave Hitler's government the power to make laws without normal parliamentary approval. That law was a turning point. It allowed him to rule far beyond the limits of a normal chancellor. Opposition parties were crushed, critics were intimidated, trade unions were eliminated, and political life was brought under Nazi control. Germany still had the outer appearance of a state with laws and institutions, but real power was being concentrated in one man's hands. Then, in 1934, after Hindenburg died, Hitler combined the roles of chancellor and president and took the title Führer. By that point, the transformation was nearly complete. Democracy had not simply been overthrown overnight. It had been weakened, manipulated, and hollowed out until almost nothing remained. And now Hitler had what he had always wanted most: a nation under his control, and a population prepared to follow him into something far darker. Once Adolf Hitler had full control of Germany, he moved quickly. He did not just want political power. He wanted to reshape the entire country around his beliefs. The economy was pushed toward rearmament, military expansion, and public works that made many Germans feel like the nation was recovering. To some people at the time, it looked like he was restoring order. But that apparent recovery came with a terrible cost. Freedom disappeared, opposition vanished, and the state became more violent with each passing year. At the center of Hitler's rule was race. He believed Germans he considered Aryan were superior, and he built policy around that fantasy. Jews were singled out first and most aggressively. They were stripped of rights, pushed out of jobs, cut off from public life, and portrayed as enemies of the nation. This was not random cruelty, it was systematic. Hitler used propaganda, law, and fear together so that hatred would become normal. That is one of the darkest lessons of his story. Evil does not always arrive in a dramatic burst. Sometimes it becomes stronger step by step, until people start treating the unacceptable as ordinary. Under Hitler, that process accelerated. The Nazi state targeted not only Jews, but also Roma people, disabled people, political opponents, gay men, and many others the regime considered undesirable. Human beings were reduced to categories, and once that happened, cruelty became easier to justify. Hitler also ignored the post-war limits placed on Germany after World War I. He rebuilt the military, sent forces into territories Germany had lost, and demanded more land. He called this need for expansion Lebensraum, or living space. In reality, it was a plan for conquest. Hitler believed Germany had the right to take territory by force, remove the people already living there, and build an empire through war. That road led straight to World War II. In 1939, Germany invaded Poland, and the wider war began. Over the next several years, Hitler's regime brought destruction across Europe. Entire cities were crushed, millions of soldiers and civilians died, and the Holocaust reached its full horror. Nazi Germany built camps designed for imprisonment, forced labor, and mass murder. 6 million Jews were killed, along with millions of other victims. The scale is so vast that it can almost numb the mind, but every number in that history was a human life. And yet, even while all of this was happening, Hitler remained at the center of a personality cult. He was presented as Germany's savior, the one man with the will to lead the nation to greatness. That is another reason his story matters. It shows what can happen when a leader builds power through myth, resentment, and blind loyalty rather than truth or law. By the final stage of the war, the empire he promised was collapsing around him. As Allied forces closed in from the west and Soviet forces pushed in from the east, Hitler retreated into his bunker in Berlin. The man who had promised a 1,000-year Reich was now surrounded by ruin. On April 30, 1945, with defeat unavoidable, he killed himself. Eva Braun, whom he had married just before the end, died with him. Their bodies were burned, just as he had ordered. That was the end of Hitler's life, but not the end of what he left behind. His legacy is one of warning. He showed how bitterness can be turned into ideology, how fear can be used to break democracy, and how a population in crisis can be manipulated by promises of pride and revenge. He did not create hatred from nothing, but he weaponized it with deadly skill. That is why Adolf Hitler should never be remembered as some strange monster outside of human history, as if he appeared from nowhere. He was a human being who made choices, gained followers, and used modern politics, media, and fear to produce catastrophe. And that is exactly why his story still matters now. All right, if you made it through this session today, that already says something about your discipline. This repetition and consistency combination might look boring on paper, but it is one of the most powerful ways to build fluent, natural English. Keep showing up like this, and your brain will slowly adapt. Trust the process. If this helped even a little, consider liking the video or subscribing. It lets me know these sessions are actually making a difference. We'll catch up again soon. Take care. Till then.